Amid the fray stands the Black Prince, violently fighting alongside his men on the front lines. Chaos prevails as steel-clad warriors push themselves beyond human limits. The clashing of metal echoes across the battlefield, mingling with the harrowing screams of pain and agony. Both armies, heavily armored, find that hand-to-hand combat had disintegrated into a brutal and chaotic melee, with formations shattered. There is no room for finesse or skill. Only raw stamina and survival instincts prevail. Those who fall are often doomed, encumbered by the armor and weapons pressed on all sides by both friend and foe alike. Combatants aim for weak spots in the armor or openings in the visors, while crushing blows prove more effective in disabling limbs, as piercing strikes are rare. Despite the ferocity of the French attack, the English advantageous defensive position proves to be an insurmountable obstacle for the attackers, as the tide of charging knights slowly abates. Observing his men's plight, the French king orders a general advance of his contingent. Leading by example, he marches his personal bodyguard through the perilous no man's land, determined to crush his hated English foes once and for all. Trumpets signal the attack as a line of 2,000 elite knights and French men-at-arms advances towards the English front, the sacred Oriflamme banner fluttering defiantly in the wind. A real-life friend of mine and game developer has recently released a demo for his upcoming game, Cult of Blood. Cult of Blood is an adventure game, blending survival horror elements with intense combat and challenging enemies, set in a remote village deep within an ominous forest. The game draws inspiration from a true story, weaving a rich and terrifying narrative. Play now the Cult of Blood demo on Steam. After the campaign that culminated in the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English King Edward III found himself in a position to assert his demands on the French aristocracy. As a result of his victory, he had acquired a strong foothold in the northern parts of France, including the occupation of Calais. The fighting between the two kingdoms only ceased due to the onset of one of the greatest catastrophes to ever hit the Middle Ages, the Black Death. It is estimated that almost half of Western Europe perished, and in parts of Europe, such as southern England, the death rate might have been even higher. It seemed that the war might end, especially after the Treaty of Guisnes was signed on April 6, 1355. However, the composition of the inner council of the French king John II changed, and sentiment turned against the treaty. In the summer of 1355, it became clear that the two kings would soon engage in full-scale war. In 1355, Edward's eldest son, Edward of Woodstock, who would later be known as the Black Prince, was given command of Gascony and began assembling an army. Arriving at the Gascon capital, the city of Bordeaux, on September 20th with 2,200 English soldiers, he was acknowledged as the king's lieutenant in Gascony by Gascon officials and was reinforced with around 5,000 men and supplies. The Black Prince set out on October 5th on what would become the largest chevauchée in the history of the 100 Years' War. The chevauchées of the 100 Years' War epitomized medieval brutality, marked by widespread destruction and psychological warfare. Villages and towns were set ablaze, leaving behind charred ruins, while fields of crops were trampled or burned, leading to famine. Raiders slaughtered indiscriminately. Homes were looted, livestock slaughtered, and infrastructure demolished, resulting in economic ruin. The terror was compounded by abductions and the pervasive fear instilled in those who heard of the atrocities. The widespread destruction and suffering caused by these raids undermined the French king's authority and legitimacy, eroding confidence in his leadership and fostering a sense of abandonment and resentment among his people. After covering more than 1,000 kilometers and meeting little to no resistance from local French forces, the expedition returned to Gascony on September 2nd. While no territory was captured, the economic damage inflicted on the French was enormous. Naturally, enthusiasm for the war were running low in France. The successive failures of the French king to protect his subject slowly pushed many regions to the brink of chaos and anarchy. Reportedly, some towns even rebelled against French loyalists, with antagonists to John finding a perfect opportunity to assert their claims and openly criticize the king. Notably, Charles, the King of Navarre, a realm nestled in the Pyrenees, but who also had extensive lands in Normandy, was a notoriously unreliable ally and outspoken critic of John. He was eventually captured and imprisoned, causing many disgruntled nobles to turn to Edward for assistance. The King of England was now able to command one of his nobles, Henry of Lancaster, to conduct a diversionary chevauchée across Normandy, in order to distract John from the ever larger preparations for a chevauchée that were taking place in Gascony under the Black Prince. After an unsuccessful attempt to intercept Lancaster, the King of France diverted his attention towards the siege of Breteuil, which he considered a more pressing matter. On August 4th, 1356, the 6,000-strong mounted Anglo-Gascon army marched north from Gascony and began to systematically devastate the countryside. As usual, the advance was slow and methodical to maximize the destruction, in what was described as an extremely brutal, deliberate, and sophisticated raid. Several towns and strongholds were captured along the way, and the destruction was compounded by the almost complete absence of the local French resistance, allowing contingents of the Anglo-Gascons to pillage far and wide. While the Black Prince's raid was transpiring in southern France, King John was still busy besieging Breteuil, declaring its garrison a more serious threat. Eventually, given the urgency of the situation, the King of France offered the garrison of Breteuil free passage and a substantial bribe, persuading them to abandon the defense of the town. This allowed John to march south with his army, gathering every available force and concentrating them against the Black Prince. Hearing that John was marching against him, Edward of Woodstock consolidated his scattered forces and marched towards Tours. His strategic objectives were to cross the river Loire and hopefully link up with Lancaster's army, which was now converging on his position from the north of France. Meanwhile, the French king directed his army towards Sarthe, where he received significant reinforcements of men-at-arms. He disbanded most of his infantry contingents, aiming to convert his army into a mobile mounted force, capable of matching the speed of the English. Once preparations were complete, John marched south towards the Loire. In early September, the Black Prince reached Tours, where he received dispatches informing him that Lancaster was close by and ready to cross the Loire. It seemed that the two forces would eventually link up, giving Edward a possible numerical superiority, but it was not to be. Most of the fords and bridges across the Loire had been fortified, blocked or destroyed, rendering Lancaster unable to cross. He soon abandoned the attempt and marched back to Brittany. Despite Lancaster's failure to link up with him, the Black Prince prepared his Anglo-Gascon force for battle, expecting the imminent arrival of the French king. However, John did not march directly on Tours, but instead crossed the Loire to the east of the city. Hearing this, Edward abandoned his position and marched south, trying to avoid being outflanked and cut off from Gascony in case his army needed to retreat. What followed was a series of marches and counter-marches, during which both commanders tried to outsmart each other. The strategic aim of the French was to get between the Anglo-Gascons and their line of supply and retreat, while the English aimed to force the French into a pitched battle at the time and place of their choosing. For a while, the two armies marched parallel to each other, until the French, due to their superior knowledge of the local topography, were able to outmaneuver the Black Prince. Crossing Sauvigny, John eventually wedged himself between Poitiers and the Black Prince, forcing the latter to consolidate his forces and seek a defensive position. With his line of retreat cut off and supplies dwindling, the Black Prince positioned his army defensively near the woods of Nouel, just a few miles southeast of Poitiers. In response, John drew up his army in battle order and waited. The Anglo-Gascon army consisted of around 6,000 men, 3,000 men-at-arms, 2,000 English and Welsh longbowmen, and 1,000 Gascon foot soldiers. The Black Prince had divided his army into 3 divisions or battles. The division on the left was commanded by Thomas, Earl of Warwick, a veteran of the Battle of Crecy, with longbowmen positioned to the left of the men-at-arms. A river and a marshy area offered exceptional protection on Edward's left flank. The right flank was commanded by the Earl of Salisbury and comprised around 1,000 men and a similar number of archers. Additional protection was provided by a series of ditches and palisades dug along the exposed right flank of the English army. The centre was commanded by the Black Prince himself and consisted of about 2,000 heavily armoured men-at-arms without any longbowmen, who were exclusively used to cover the flanks of the formation. Additionally, the area in front of the English army was covered with hawthorn hedges and vineyards, making a frontal assault quite challenging. Finally, a very small detachment of mounted knights was kept in reserve under the command of Captal de Buch. The French army was around 14,000 men strong, with 10,000 men-at-arms, 2,000 crossbowmen, and a few infantrymen interspersed. Given the painful experience of the Battle of Crecy just 10 years prior, the French largely fought on foot, except for 2 small groups of exceptionally well-equipped mounted knights featuring armoured horses. The French king had divided his army into 4 battles. In front of the formation were the 2 mounted contingents led by Adrahem and Jean de Clermont, backed by Genoese crossbowmen. Behind them was the division of men-at-arms led by the Dauphin, who would have his first taste of battle, numbering around 4,000 men. The 3rd division was led by John's brother, the Duke of Orleans, and also consisted primarily of men-at-arms. The 4th and final division was led by the king himself, comprising about 2,000 of the most elite and well-equipped knights and men-at-arms. Attempts to negotiate a truce were doomed to fail, as the English were running low on supplies, and the French were confident they had the English cornered. On September 19th, the 2 armies took up positions and waited. After 2 hours of this standstill, the left English division, the Warwick, began to move eastward, seemingly abandoning the battlefield. Whether this was an intentional withdrawal or the Black Prince's ruse to entice the French to attack is unclear. When Adrahem noticed the movement, he interpreted it as a full-scale withdrawal and ordered a general cavalry charge. Clermont, on the other hand, advised caution, believing it unwise to attack a strong defensive position, especially since the English could easily be starved into submission. Accusations of cowardice and impetuosity of the French knights sidelined caution, and Adrahem's cavalry charged against Warwick's men, followed by crossbowmen marching in support. The heavily armoured horsemen quickly closed the distance, However, the longbowmen were well protected by the marshy area, which was unreachable by the horses. Consequently, the cavalry diverted their charge against the English men-at-arms in front of them. Initially, the arrows did little damage against the well-protected horses. The longbowmen then directed their attention to the crossbowmen, who, despite being protected by their pavise shields, were unable to match the fire rate of the English. After a brief exchange of shots, the English longbowmen prevailed, forcing the Genoese to retreat and redirecting their attention to the engaged cavalry, whose unarmored flanks were now exposed. The outnumbered French began taking heavy casualties, and within moments their entire line was either dead or retreating, while their commander was captured. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the battlefield, Clermont was more cautious, but his prospects weren't any better. Events unfolded here almost mirrored the situation on the left English flank. The English longbowmen were entrenched to the right of the main line of men-at-arms, who were in turn protected by a thick hedge with a single passable but heavily defended gap. Once again, Clermont's heavily armored cavalry closed the distance and engaged with the English, but was soon overwhelmed by the numerically superior English and the disastrous flanking barrage of longbow shots that decimated their formation. It wasn't long before they were forced back with heavy casualties, including Clermont. The English did not give chase to the retreating enemy, displaying remarkable discipline. Instead, they held their positions, taking the opportunity to reform and prepare for the next assault already being launched against them. 4,000 men under the Dauphin marched against a relentless hail of longbow shots and had to force their way through the heavily defended hedge, engaging in brutal and unrelenting hand-to-hand combat. The rushed French attack was contrasted by the disciplined and organized response of the Anglo-Gascon army, which utilized their fortifications to funnel the attackers into killing zones and redirect reinforcements to heavily pressed sections of their battle line. This was probably the most intense fighting of the battle, lasting for at least 2 hours. Men fought frenziedly in a desperate struggle for survival, overcoming exhaustion through sheer instinct and will. It became clear that the French were unable to make any meaningful progress, but eventually the Dauphin gave the order to retreat, which was eventually conducted in an orderly and organized manner. Observing the defeat of the first battle, the commander of the 2nd French Division, the Duke of Orleans, ordered a general retreat of his entire group. The reason for this is still unclear, though several theories have been suggested, including an official order from John himself, instructing the Duke to escort his sons, who were positioned in his division, safely from the battlefield. Whatever the case, the only remaining French division on the battlefield was now that of King John. The 2,000 elite men-at-arms of the final French battle were ordered forward, with John proclaiming, "Forward, for I will recover the day, or be taken or slain." The king then ordered the sacred Oriflamme banner to be unfurled, signaling that no prisoners would be taken. Despite the disastrous course of the battle for the French so far, the final assault seemed to dishearten the few battered and exhausted English. One chronicler reported that the Black Prince prayed aloud as the division approached. At this point of the battle, the Black Prince devised a brilliant stratagem, ordering a few mounted knights of Captal de Buch on a circuitous march behind the French. They were instructed to strike the enemy's rear when their entire army was engaged in combat. A contingent of crossbowmen moved ahead of the advancing French men-at-arms and briefly exchanged fire with longbowmen before retreating to make way for the incoming infantry. The densely packed French then engaged in a ferocious hand-to-hand combat, with the exhausted Anglo-Gascon line, which had moved forward to meet them. A chronicler described the ensuing carnage in graphic detail. Then the standards wavered. The standard bearers fell. Some were trampled, their innards torn open, and others spat their own teeth. Many were struck fast to the ground, impaled. Not a few lost whole arms as they stood there. Some died, swallowing the blood of others. Some groaned, crushed beneath the heavy weight of the fallen. Mighty souls gave forth fearful lamentations as they departed from wretched bodies. Exhausted as they were, the English began to slowly give way to the French momentum, but were soon joined by Warwick's division, which stabilized the situation. It was at this moment that Captal de Buch, with his mounted force, made his appearance and unfurled St. George's banner, charging at the rear of the engaged French. Shocked by the unexpected cavalry charge and dismayed by the arrival of Warwick's division, the French line disintegrated, leaving only small pockets of resistance, including the king and his elite personal bodyguard who refused to retreat or surrender. These were men who refused to give up, preferring death rather than the disgrace of retreat. King John fought bravely, forcing even English chroniclers to praise his valor, with one even declaring that the French royal house was yet not altogether degenerate after all. That resistance was futile, and when the standard-bearer of the Oriflamme was killed, surrounded on all sides, King John and his youngest son, Philip, surrendered. Casualties are estimated at around 4,000 French either captured or killed, while on the English side, the dead and wounded were reportedly much lower. Some sources suggesting only 40 or 50 men-at-arms lost, and an undisclosed number of common infantry and archers. The battle was an utter catastrophe for the French, with the flower of their nobility almost entirely captured or wiped out, and their king turning into a prisoner of war. On the other hand, the Black Prince's triumph was beyond anything that he could have imagined. It seemed that now the fortunes of war were truly on his father's side.